Hi, it's Allison from the Law School Toolbox. Today, I'm excited to have ADHD coach Rawi Nanakul here with us to talk about thriving in law school with ADHD. Welcome, Rawi.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, to start us off, can you just give our listeners some information about your background and your work so they have a little bit of context here?
Yeah, I'm what you call an ADHD coach. I help people come up with strategies to achieve goals in the way that works best for their brains. In other words, I help them be accountable and come up with ADHD-friendly strategies to achieve what they want to do.
Nice. Well, that certainly sounds very useful. And if people want to learn more about you or reach out, how can they do that?
You can find me at adhdproduct.com or hdpm.substack.com.
Awesome. Well, to kick us off, let's just talk a little bit about what is ADHD? I mean, how does this show up for people?
Yeah, I feel like in the last couple of years, it's really blown up in popular culture, but from a lot of people, they've never heard the official definition of it. When you think of ADHD, you either think of a hyperactive little boy or somebody who can't sit still or somebody who's forgetful. But the reality of it is that ADHD is far more than that. I'll give you the US medical definition of it, and I'll give you like my mental model definition of it. The medical definition is a neurological disorder that presents in either hyperactivity, inattentiveness, and impulsivity. So you have a mix of someone who can't sit still, right? They just need to keep moving. Someone who can't really pay attention, so give them a piece of paper, they can't just read it down, they kind of have to skip around. And then someone who's really impulsive. They want to go gamble or they want to take a road trip in the middle of the night to go see something they just read about in the news. These are the medical definitions of it, and they're also sustained over at least 6 months. So when people say like, oh, I feel ADD, get a little hurtful because I've been living with this my entire life. It's not something that is temporary for me. The European definition of it includes emotional regulation, and that's where we're going to talk a lot about today, is that emotional dysregulation is a core component of European diagnostic standards, but not in the American DSM.
So, what does that mean, emotional dysregulation?
And so the way I like to describe it is that as someone with ADHD, I feel emotional reactions that are improportional to the event around me. And that causes a byproduct of inattention and focus. And so my mental model is ADHD is really an emotional regulation disorder, in which the byproducts are attention and focus. To more simply put, because I feel so panicked about something that someone just told me, it makes me come off as being inattentive to or not listening to you. So if I said, oh, if you were to tell me, Rowie, I really don't like the color of your shirt, in my head, I might just think, oh my God, she doesn't like me. I don't know what to do. And like, I'm now 10,000 miles away thinking about all the things that I've done wrong that led up to this point. And at the end, you go, hey, Rowie, are you paying attention to me? That is the kind of inner dialogue of ADHD that most people don't see. They just see our actions and our words, right? But there's a lot more going on underneath, and that's why I think that the core component of it is emotional dysregulation. The focus and attention part is the only thing you get to see, so that's why we jump to that conclusion.
No, it's very interesting because I've noticed that a lot of people that we work with who have ADHD also tend to have some type of anxiety disorder or test anxiety or something like that. So this all kind of tracks with that, of it being more than just like, oh, I get distracted by things.
Yes, and that's a common misdiagnosis for folks with ADHD
Hmm.
is to be diagnosed with anxiety, be given ADHD medication, and it not be effective. And when they take ADHD meds, they find it to be effective.
Hmm. That is indeed very interesting. It's just I've noticed the pairing of people saying that, they've got both.
Hmm?
So I mean, you alluded to this, but you were actually diagnosed later in life, I believe. What's that experience been like for you?
Yeah, so I want to take you kind of back a little bit in my life. I used to be a former attention and autism researcher from 2000 to 2011. I worked in one of the world's foremost labs in autism at UC Davis. I thought everyone around me, I recognized everybody around me had some sort of neurodiversity, and I thought I was the only normal person. I just thought like, oh, I'm just like, for some reason, I just get along with all these people.
How did I end up here?
How did I end up here? Um, and 3 years ago, I was having challenges with my wife. I went to a marriage therapist, and they told them our problems, and the therapist asked me, hey, have you ever been diagnosed? Have you ever been tested for ADHD? And this is my ego. In my head, I thought, no, I used to be an attention researcher. Someone would have told me. The answer, no, no, they wouldn't. Actually, as a good friend, you wouldn't go around trying to diagnose your friends. And so they're very good friends to me, and that they never brought that up. And so for me, getting that diagnosis was suddenly a moment of, oh, like these things I experienced, I thought they were because I was broken. I thought these were things that was a failure of me, my thoughts of self-harm, my thoughts of constant failure, my thoughts of wanting to quit things all the time. I thought these were because of a personal flaw. Getting diagnosed helped me realize, no, it's not a personal flaw. It is a disorder that I happen to have that's also shared by 3 to 5% of the global population. I am not alone
Right.
in my struggle.
Oh, it's so interesting. I mean, I think a lot of us who go to therapy later in life realize, like, wait a second, I'm actually not the crazy one here. Like, things happen that cause me to behave this way. So I feel like it's sort of a similar type of realization of just, this is what it is. It's not a character flaw. It's just kind of the way that your brain happens to work.
Exactly. And you see this even more in academia, right? Regardless if you're in neuroscience or in law, like academia in general, you you're selecting for a certain group of people who are fixated on a very particular thing, right? They've chosen to be experts on this one thing at a deeper level than anyone else. Probably going to find some neurodiverse people in there.
That is also a fair point. And, we see this a lot in students that come to us for help where they have gotten through other experiences. They got through undergrad, they did fine, they got through high school. Maybe they've even had some work experience, but suddenly when they get to law school, all of these things suddenly start to be really hard. And a lot of them start to realize, like, maybe there is a little bit more going on than this just being a challenging experience. Maybe I do have ADHD or some other type of neurodiversity. What do you think are some signs that people might look for? I mean, it sounds like, possible problems in their relationships could be one that you experience, but just in general, to kind of clue them in that, hey, maybe there is something else going on here.
So first, I'll put out a disclaimer that I'm an ADHD coach, not a medical
Sure,
professional.
of course.
If you want medical advice, if you suspect that you have ADHD or something, another neurological disorder, please go see a professional. Um, I can share you my personal experience around that, and the this would be my as hot take isn't the right way, but like my different way of looking at this is that we like all of us have created mechanisms for us to live our lives, and it's not a problem until it's a problem. So this is the classic case of how someone with ADHD gets diagnosed in that it was totally fine for me to read the biology book the night before the test and still get an A. It was totally fine for me to go to college and do that. It did not work for me in grad school. Right? So these mechanisms that we've all created for ourselves, regardless if you're neurodiverse or not, work until a certain extent. What happens when you have a form of neurodiversity is that at some point those systems break down, and the first kind of culprit is you think you're broken. But the reason, so like the first step is like get that, like the signs here are, if you think that you are the one broken and like you're so fixated that you are the problem, talk to a therapist or a doctor. If your thought is, oh, I just need to change my study habits, or I need to like add these different things in, you might be a little bit more well balanced than I am. But that framing, though, like, to answer your question, using this framing of what are systems that I have in my life that I'm aware that I should probably improve, right? Things like studying the night before, if those have become crutches for you and they no longer work, but you're struggling to do a different process, I think that's a great time to start seeking for professional help. It's not so much like a one-to-one medical correlation, but it's more of a reflection of the tools that you have in front of you, the tools that you know are no longer working. So maybe it's a doctor, maybe it's a law school coaching program, maybe it's a therapist. It's just more of a recognition that the tools I have no longer work. What do I have available to me to explore to address that?
And talk to me a little bit about that. What is the potential difference between, the possible help you might get from a doctor versus a therapist versus a coach, whether it's, someone like our tutors or you as an ADHD coach? What's kind of the universe that people are looking at here?
Yeah, I like to use the kind of image of spheres of care. And so you have a doctor who addresses your heart, general health. You have a psychiatrist who will look after your psychiatric well-being. So that's who you'll talk to for an ADHD diagnosis and everything. You have a therapist who you can go talk to, typically about the path, in that, hey, why can't I let go of me messing up on this test years ago? Right? And then those individuals have an equal amount of power to you, meaning you are going to them to solve a problem for you. Like when I go to the doctor, I say, hey, this is hurt, fix it. Now, coaching or a tutor, or a coach or a tutor, has an equal level of power. They are working with you in order to achieve the goal. They're helping you identify the strategies and tools you need to pass the bar, get into law school, etc. They work with you. You're not going to them for an answer. The other component.
I wish
Go
we
ahead.
could do that. I wish we had the magic wand we could wave to solve all of your problems and answer, everything for you. But yeah, that's unfortunately just not how this works.
And here's the other key difference, right? So like one is like, hey, like I want you to fix. You don't care that your doctor has had a heart attack before to address your heart attack. You just care that they've seen 100 heart attacks. It's different from a coach or a tutor where you care if they've ever passed the bar before. You care they've been to law school before. You care if they have ADHD, or in my case, been a product manager, because you're trying to achieve that thing with them, right? So the context of how those skills are applied are very different between your doctors, like your medical providers, and your coaches.
Definitely. And the other thing people might want to look into at their school is, they're going to have an office that you're going to have to talk to if you think you need accommodations or things like that. So, they're required to have that. So you can definitely reach out and kind of get that level of framework as well. But yeah, there are a lot of moving parts here, which I think can be challenging for people.
Yeah, you brought up another great point. Within the spheres of care, if you are going to pursue an accommodation or a disclosure with an organization under the ADA, your therapist can help you with that. Your doctor can help with that. Like a coach typically, unless the coach is also a therapist, wouldn't typically be able to advise you on those types of things. But understanding the resources that your school has for mental health and accommodations is another great first stop, and it's going to vary from school to school.
Yeah. Some of them, it's definitely easier than others. It is kind of ironic that, people are expected to kind of run this very complicated gauntlet on their own to get accommodations for not being able to, plan things very well and stuff like that. But That is the world we live in.
It is a harsh irony.
It is indeed. Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about a few scenarios that I'm interested in getting your thoughts on. So, I'm midway through law school. I was diagnosed with ADHD many years ago. My whole academic career, I've had accommodations, everything. I knew I was going to face some challenges in law school, but it has been a lot harder than I expected. My grades are pretty bad. Do you think it's too late to turn things around? I mean, should I just give up and find something else to do?
Absolutely not. And I want to share a quote from you, or quote to you from Fawn Weaver. She's the CEO of Uncle Nearest Whiskey Company. They're the fastest growing whiskey company in U.S. history. And she recently wrote a book about Nearest Green, who's the first Black master distiller in the U.S. that we know, and he was an enslaved person. It was the first distiller for Jack Daniel. And the quote is, "I don't believe in failure. It doesn't exist unless you give up before you succeed." And I really like that quote because as someone with ADHD, my first reaction to hardship is fight or flight.
Hmm.
And for me, that's quitting. And so much so, it's my fight or flight is so extreme. Quitting might be my first thing, and the second thing is I should just off myself. Yeah, and I thought that was normal. I just thought it was normal for people to think about suicide. And I'm very open about this subject because it just shows the extent of this emotional dysregulation, I imagine, that I described earlier. Right? So in this moment, so going back to your question, like, okay, is it too late to turn things around? Of course not. We have lots of different mechanisms for schools to support you. The first step is recognize I'm not a broken person, it's a broken process. And being able to take yourself out of that shame spiral, darkness spiral, whatever it is, like whatever is keeping you there, or like whatever these thoughts that are surrounding you and keeping you from thinking that like it's over, we have to remove you from that first. And that could be talking to a therapist, that could be talking to a friend, that could be getting into a regular sleep and exercise routine. There are all these different things that we can do to change our neurochemistry and just reaching out to others, like expressing our emotion. Because when we don't let that out, like that fear, this fear of should I give up and do something else? When we don't have an outlet for that, it just sits and festers within us until it just consumes you, and then you quit. And so you fail because you didn't do anything as a result.
Right. It becomes sort of the self-fulfilling prophecy and downward spiraling of just like, well, I'm going to, think poorly of myself and not get any help. And then, oh, whoops, it didn't work out well. So I must be a failure, which I just hate to see. Because a lot of this is, a lot of these are learned skills. You can learn to do law school, just like you can learn to do anything else.
Agreed. And it really, like, once you're out of that rut, it's understanding, how do I want to accomplish this? My tutor says I should study this way, and should is a keyword that'll probably come up again. Like, my tutor says I should study this way. Is that actually the way that works best for you, though? Right? If your brain is wired differently, that means that you just need a different way of doing the thing. So I think in the case of if you were working with a law school tutor, it's like, okay, well, this is the outcome I'm trying to do. What are the ways I get into my flow state? Flow state being that state in which you actually start the task and you're doing it and you're focusing. How can I work with my tutor to to identify how I get into those flow states rather than just doing the full fight or flight?
Yeah. I mean, I think what we're trying to do and what it sounds like you're trying to do too is strategize around the problem and like really identify the problem, identify some possible solutions, try them out, iterate through them. And it's a collaborative process. It's not top down saying, okay, the only way to do it is this. It's really like, what is going to work for you? And then really identifying those things so that you can do them and be more successful, in this process.
Yes, and that's actually the hardest part. I don't want to minimize that. Because oftentimes the strategies that people get from self-help books or a coaching tutor, those strategies may work for those person as they are, but that person has to be in the emotional state in order to allow themselves to process that. Because right now, if I were to tell a law student who was doing very poorly, and I just went and they said, hey, like, what do I do? It's like, well, you should just study harder.
Like, oh,
Probably going to tell me,
that's
yeah,
helpful. Thanks.
right? And so if you're a tutor listening to this, right, having more empathy to say, okay, like, this is what we need to do. How can we get you to, what do we need to allow you to process? Maybe it's just processing that emotion and then going the strategy. Or maybe it's, hey, like, here's some different sets of strategies. How do you feel about them? Like, which one is easier for you to start and stop? But oftentimes, like I said, like the biggest part is actually allowing yourself to process those emotions. Strategies and all those other parts are kind of secondary. They're oftentimes much easier.
Right. I mean, we can't focus and learn and think very clearly if our brains are like, in a heightened state of arousal and those all kind of, I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, I'm sure we all know the neuroscience data on that you have to be in a certain state to actually be able to focus and learn. And if your brain thinks you're running from a lion, it's probably not going to focus on like learning tort law.
Uh, if you have to spend 70% of your emotional energy keeping your shit together, that means you only have 30% left to study for law school, work at a day job. And that's the biggest thing I work on with my clients is how do I reduce the cost for them just to be them? Reduce the cost to managing their anxiety, managing their masks that they might have to feel like they have in order to be in the environment they're in, so that they have more capacity to do these things that they want to do.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense that you've got to start with like the baseline of getting yourself ready to be in a state where you can actually process information versus not being able to do that and just getting frustrated with the whole situation.
Correct. And again, it goes back to oftentimes as a neurodiverse person, you blame yourself.
Right, exactly. Which is sad and unfortunate and, has consequences that are not great as, all right, well, let's shift gears to another question. So, I am a new law student. I've got ADHD, and I'm finding it really hard to force myself to do the required reading and also to keep track of all my assignments, especially these semester long legal research and writing projects. Do you have any tips for just getting better at this?
Yeah, there's two ways to kind of approach this. Right? So within ADHD, like one of the areas that impairs the most is executive function. Executive function are these different domains that are classify them as these higher domains of your brain. So things like task initiation, time management, goal setting. These are all parts of executive function. By the way, there's no like one set of executive functions to rule them all. There's a broad term, and depending who you ask, there's different categories in it. And so my first step, my advice to a person would be to take a step back. What are the things that are preventing you from doing these different items? Right? And then understand how is it that you want to do these? What works best for you? Because for one person, it might be reading, let's say, 20 minutes a day. And so if I need to read 100 minutes in a week, one person might say, well, I'm going to do it 20 minutes a day. That's how I best retain information. Now, an ADHDer with hyperfixation might say, well, actually, I can do it in 100 minutes. Like I'm going to do it in one sitting. That's how I best retain that information. And so it's really about allowing yourself to say, that's how I operate, and that's okay. While still checking in to say, well, that might be how you operate, but is that the best for you? So if you are going to read 100 minutes at a time instead of 20 minutes a day, what are the other things you have to juggle that again? How are you going to take notes in that? Right. So You might have read it all, but if you don't have good notes for it, it might not be as effective. So constantly going back, with yourself of how you operate best, and then like working with your tutor or whoever else to kind of figure out like where is the happy medium, and creating your own way. When you feel emotionally regulated for that strategy, when you feel like, oh, this is going to be successful, you are more likely to show up and do it.
I think that's definitely true. I've certainly seen that. If people are, you've got to kind of commit to the process before the process is going to be effective for you.
Yes, and oftentimes when you have neurodiversity, you do things that are out of alignment with your feelings because that's what you think is expected of, right? So in the case of this, like, oh, I should read 20 minutes a day. And there's a cost to that because it's really not that effective for them. So they force themselves to do it and they carry the shame because they can't, and all these other ancillary costs to it, rather than being able to say, no, I'm a read it all at once kind of block kind of guy, and that's what I'm going to do, and allowing yourself just to be okay with that.
Yeah, we see this a lot with people who are studying for the bar exam because they'll purchase a big course and the course will tell them, this is your schedule. And they present them with something absurd like 10 to 12 hours a day of work to do 7 days a week for 3 months. And I mean, anyone looking at this is going to be really overwhelmed, but certainly someone who's neurodiverse is probably going to say, no, this is absolutely not going to work. And then people can't keep up and then they get stressed about it. And that definitely very quickly becomes a downward spiral. So I feel like what you're saying here would probably apply to that as well, correct?
It doesn't, and what you're really looking for is inclusive design. You're not really looking for an accommodation to the program per se, like the accommodation of, hey, I would like this program 2 weeks longer because I need more time for it, or whatever things that come up with. Like if you're looking at that program and thinking like, oh my God, I don't know how I could do this. To me, that's a reflection of the design of the process. That's not a reflection of a broken person. And that's like the way to address that is being able to understand and develop your own self-awareness through therapy, coaching, etc., to say, this like 10 to 12 hour schedule, this is how I break that down. Right? Like these blocks that they've told me I have to do in this way, that doesn't work for me. I have to flip it in this way. Or sometimes like the strategy works, but they have to break it down into smaller chunks so they aren't as overwhelmed.
Right. I mean, I would argue no one can actually study for 10 to 12 hours a day successfully. That's just not how anyone's brain works. But nobody hired me to design a big bar program. We design our own schedules. We try to make them more flexible. All right. Well, before we wrap up, I want to get your thoughts on this. So, I'm a student who's considering law school, and I'm worried about succeeding because I have ADHD. What type of support system would you suggest getting in place before I commit to this?
I will tell you all the things that I do to regulate my self-care in my day-to-day life. I would say that I'm a pretty high-achieving individual. I'm a Fulbright scholar. I have a master's degree. I worked at FANG level companies. On paper, I'm a high achiever, but I do so much stuff to take care of myself. And I think that I'm sharing this because I think oftentimes we just see like the high achievements and we don't realize like all the work that's involved. So for me, it's sleeping 8 hours a day. Again, you probably think it's like, yeah, okay, hit sleep. It's like, well, what you probably don't know about is something called delayed sleep syndrome, which is common with people with ADHD and autism, in which your sleep cycle is not the typical, sun up to sun down. Sometimes your sleep cycle is delayed, so my focus, like my best attentional time, is between 9 and 12. I have friends with their best focus time is 3 to 5 p.m. Being aware of, like when I say yes, you need to sleep, but also be aware that there are going to be barriers for yourself. And so see a sleep consultant. Like I saw a sleep consultant recently. Turns out I have sleep apnea. So my struggles with sleep weren't actually all my fault. It wasn't just me staying up to play video game. I actually had true biological issues underneath it. So sleeping, have a regular exercise routine. Uh, I run 5 days a week in the morning because that's what I need to set me up for the day. If I don't run, I know that I'm going to be off. I see a therapist on a biweekly basis just to talk through all of my stuff. I see a psychiatrist on a monthly or biweekly basis as well, in order to make sure that my medication management is in line, expressing any kind of changes I might need. So I am medicated with ADHD. It's one of the things that does help me. It may not help for everyone. And medications change. Like there's a myth that once you get the pill, like you're done. It's like, no, I've had to go through 5 different medications in the last 3 years, and it's sometimes I go to ones I've had before. Sometimes I have to stop things that worked entirely. And then making time for self-care. Besides like having like an exercise and sleep routine, making sure that you carving out time to be you, because that's how you are able to emotionally regulate into these kind of heavy setting patterns that you're going to be going into. It's easy to, when you enter in like a very hyper competitive and new environment, say like, no, I just have to give it my all. The reality is like you're a battery. And if you have ADHD, you're the plugs on that battery pack. If you imagine one of those like phone battery thing, sometimes you have multiple plugs and it's great. Sometimes you get one. Right? You never know. It changes. But that battery pack needs to be charged. Right? There are times that you need to just charge it in and like let it like not touch it. There are times you can charge it and still do a little bit of work. I write my newsletter as a way for me to charge my battery, but also do marketing for myself. If you're able to manage that, right, like think about yourself as a battery. What are my times to charge? What are my times that I'm working? How am I managing the plugs in order to be most efficient with the capacity that I have?
No, honestly, I think that's great advice for everyone. I definitely completely drained my battery my first semester of law school and then ended up clinically depressed the next semester. So, the sleep was a huge thing, like all the things you're talking about. I'm like, wow, that all happened. All right, well, we're about out of time here. Any final thoughts you would like to share on this?
If you're listening to this, you're probably already a high achiever. So my advice to you isn't so much, hey, like, what do I need to do to prepare more for law school? My advice to you is to really look at how can you better take care of yourself? How are you recharging your battery? Because you're probably going to survive fine. You're probably going to get through school. You're probably going to get through the bar. Like all this work stuff will happen. The thing that's most important, the thing that you can't really like repair is you. So if you burn your battery out through law school, that impact is going to carry with you for the rest of your life. You can always get another job. You can always switch to a different school. But the cost isn't worth it to your body and your mind because you can't repair those things.
Yeah, and I think that's so important when you look at the actual data of outcomes of people in law school and lawyers. I mean, it's not a particularly healthy profession. So I think being aware of that going into it and really focusing on your self-care and, really just staying true to yourself and taking care of yourself. I mean, it's a very difficult thing to do in these environments, but I think it's super important.
Yeah, and also that those challenges don't go away once you get out of law school. Right?
Exactly.
Like
This is
you
practice.
think, right? Yeah. I carry the same challenges now that I have had for the last decade. It's just a different context, right? So like, yeah, you
Yeah.
got through law school, cool. You still have the same problem in your practice.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like things just start ramping up and up and up. The more and more responsibility you get, the more you're expected to work. If you don't start developing, essentially, I mean, really their boundaries around what you're willing to put up with as a law student, it's pretty unlikely you're going to go into a happy, successful career as a lawyer either, unfortunately.
100%. And boundaries is something that um, when you have ADHD, it's something that I'm constantly talking to clients about. Like, what am I willing to do for myself? What am I willing to do for someone else? And setting up those boundaries allow you to enforce the self-awareness you have, do the things the way that work for you.
Totally. Well, remind us again how people can find out more about you and reach out if they want to do that.
Yeah, you can find me at adhdproduct.com, and you can also check me out on my free weekly newsletter, adhdpm.substack.com.
Awesome. Well, Rawi, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a super interesting and useful conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And thanks everyone for watching. And please subscribe so you don't miss anything. And you can check out lawschooltoolbox.com and reach out with any questions.